Okay. Hello and welcome. I am Clara Schweitzer. I'm an intern at the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. I am currently speaking from Nepal, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar on menstrual empowerment and dignified menstruation. So also welcome to Bethan Walters, who will be our speaker today. She is the Human Rights and Communication and Media Officer at the SIG Human Rights Group and runs the Menstrual Empowerment Project. She has a bachelor's degree in politics and international relations and a master's degree in international relations, and also has been doing extracurricular work on fertility and menstrual health. So welcome, Bethan.
Thank you.
So let's start. So first, we would like to know a little bit about your work at the SIG Human Rights Group. So maybe you can give us a short introduction or an insight on your work and especially on the Menstrual Empowerment Project.
Yeah, definitely. So the SIG Human Rights Group started in 1984. So my director, Dr. Jasdev Rai, started the organization. And the organization's ethos is based on Sikh philosophy. So this concept that all human beings and communities coexist with dignity and in harmony with each other and the planet. So what we promote as an organization as a whole is these principles in fields of volunteering, kind of research sector, human rights work and projects and supporting funding, etc. And we work in partnerships like yourselves. And then a lot of individuals as well we work with. And the organization is based off pushing this kind of pluralistic mindset. So whereby we kind of accept that there are differences among us, right? Everyone is different due to race, due to religion, due to gender, due to sexuality, whatever it is that makes us different. But rather than kind of merely tolerating that, which a lot of the time governments kind of just push that you tolerate each other at best, and that doesn't happen obviously a lot of the time. What we're trying to push is this pluralistic mindset that actually you start to coexist and thrive from one another. So you thrive from each other's differences and you kind of embrace that, oh, this is really interesting how different you are and how you something very different to me because of your culture or because of your background. So in 2015, we gained the United Nations ECOSOC status, which allows us to lobby at the United Nations, lobby at the Human Rights Council, which is going on at the moment, and just be quite vocal on a lot of issues that are going on there. So that's really, quite an achievement for my director to achieve. So I started in 2020, and I started our menstrual empowerment project at maybe halfway through last year. And my interest spiked because I previously was still doing a few hours a week for this woman in Canada called Lisa Henderson-Jack, and she's a pioneer in basically looking at fertility and tracking your cycle to use it as a birth control. So instead of using hormonal birth control, what she pushes is this kind of you track your own cycle by taking your temperature, tracking your cervical mucus, and recognizing, okay, I'm going to be fertile in these few days, so I should probably not have unprotected sex in those few days if I don't want to get pregnant, or vice versa. So I am her social media manager, so that's what I do in like my spare time in the evenings. So I really liked what she was pushing, but again, what she was pushing, it was through social media and just conversation, whereas I wanted to take that at a higher level and work with the United Nations and work on a local basis in the UK as well. So since doing the project, we've got a network now of just over 96 organizations, and they cover 5 different continents. And what we're doing is trying to share resources, research, experience, kind of voices to help remove menstrual stigma, improve education and access, and to just make kind of the option for sustainable menstruation more accessible for people who menstruate, or at least the choice to do so. And obviously, like yourselves, just all in all try to remove this kind of taboo that's attached to it and just create menstrual or dignified menstruation. So yeah, that's what we're kind of doing with that project. We're doing national level with trying to make sure that, again, this conversation is better, and trying to make sure that there is access in all public places, places of worship, schools, etc., with menstrual products. And if they can be sustainable, then great. And then on an international level, we're working at the UN to try and remove globally the tampon tax, and also, which I'll go into later, but trying to create a basic level of education, so a global governing body that will set a basic education or curriculum for menstruation, so that every kind of country or a member state of the UN is at least adopting this basic level, and then each country with this idea of pluralism will teach it in a very different way that suits them, but at least there's this basic level of like, you need to teach this from this age so that people understand what's happening to them. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we started doing maybe about 6 to 8 months ago.
Thank you very much for giving that introduction to your work. So yeah, what did inspire you to work on menstruation? Was there a specific occasion or something that happened?
I think, yeah, I've been interested in kind of feminism and gender equality and equity for a really long time anyway, from a really young age, and tried to get as involved in it as possible. I think particularly when I started working for Lisa in March last year, I loved how candidly we were talking about fertility, talking about menstrual health, etc. And what I found as well was, if, for instance, in the UK, 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, which is, I haven't got it, but I know that's really horrible, and I feel for people who have it. And it's really hard to detect as well. You do have to have quite a procedure to actually see if you've got it and then to remove it. But what I found really interesting is that, we pride ourselves in the UK for having the NHS really kind of progressive medical care, and obviously we saw that with the vaccine, etc. Like, they pride themselves on it, but yet it takes 8 to 12 years for people to know that they've got endometriosis. And the reason because is that people are being put in the UK on, for instance, the birth control pill, not because they want to use it as contraception, but because, oh, I've got bad period pains, or I've got irregular periods, or I've got really heavy periods. So what they're doing is they're being then given this birth control pill to deal with these symptoms. Whereas actually what's not happening is the conversation of, okay, well, why is it that you're having these experiences when you menstruate? And it's actually like, not that every menstruation looks normal. Everyone has got a very different one, and it varies throughout your ages, etc. And your lifestyle. If you're quite stressed, obviously it's going to look very different. But it was this idea of like using your menstruation and your menstrual cycle as this 5th vital sign. Using it like, for instance, if you're in a car crash, it's the first thing a doctor will ask a woman or a person who menstruates is, when was your last period? When did you last menstruate? Because it can give you a really good insight into your health. So obviously we're giving people these pills from really young age, when they're not even having sex, because they're treating these these conditions or these symptoms to something that's a lot bigger and actually could make them infertile. So when they come off the birth control pill, when they're ready to give birth or to get pregnant, although there's a lot of other issues attached to that, they're also realizing that they've got endometriosis. This problem they had 12 years ago still exists. It hasn't been fixed. It's just been, the symptoms have been disguised. So I think that was something that really made me think, okay, actually, I'm here for birth control. I think it's so empowering, and I'm not trying to take it away, but actually, I think we need to better the conversation around menstruation, and actually, people need to understand what should be normal for them. And then if it's not, normal, they deal with that. Then they go on, something to make it easier and more manageable. I'm here for that. But obviously you need to know what's going on with your body beforehand, which a lot of people don't. And that's why it takes so long for people to realize they've even got it. So I think that was probably the big pushing point. And I thought, actually, young girls at such at 13 or so, being put on these pills straight away before actually understanding their own body, and actually what's something so fascinating. And so kind of magical is like just being like, okay, push it away, we're not talking about it. So I think that all comes back to, again, this taboo that is, because it's such a you can't talk about it topic, about it with their friends or their family, and they don't ask, oh, is this normal that I've got a 12-day menstrual cycle, like I'm bleeding for 12 days? And it's like, well, probably not actually healthy to do that. It might be that you're low in iron, whatever it is. So I think that was probably the big pushing point. And I thought, okay, well, how can we take this and take it at an international level? And actually, who else is doing stuff like this? And obviously, loads of people are. So let's work together.
Yeah, that's great. I understand that. So we need to have a conversation in that, and not only like search for quick fixes for those problems that really have an impact on girls' lives. So you told us about the Sikh community and their concept and ideas, and you also want to talk about menstrual practices, different menstrual practices. So do you know if the Sikh community has specific menstrual practices that women, girls, and menstruators do during their menstruation?
Yeah, so I found this question, but also this topic really interesting. Obviously, working in my job, it's a very small organization. So I have a director who I work with, and then another colleague who's also male. So when I started talking about how I want to start doing more stuff on this, I felt quite comfortable talking about it, and they did. To be fair, my director is also a surgeon, so he's trained doctor, like he's very, very impressive man. So obviously he probably feels quite comfortable talking about stuff like this. He would have learned about it to a higher level than most. So that was interesting. And then I thought, actually, I hadn't thought about it from a Sikh perspective. I'm not Sikh myself, so it's not a religion that I know as much about. I obviously try to learn a lot more because of the organization I work for, but again, I'm not an expert. So I did some research into, okay, actually, I would be surprised if this a religion kind of does suppress women who menstruate at the time they're menstruating. Maybe it's something that would be surprising. But actually, what I did find that is kind of all religions in the world do place restrictions on people who menstruate. So which I'll go into like a little bit later, but Sikhism is the only religion where the scriptures condemn sexism and don't impose any restrictions on menstruating women. The founder of Sikhism kind of condemns the practice of treating women as impure when they menstruate, which is really fascinating because I think, and that's what I really have started to love and learn about Sikhism is that, and while I'm very much quite happy to push at least some of its philosophy, is because it's one of the only religions I've noticed that it doesn't really set any gender norms or gender kind of identities or gender kind of job roles in its scripture. A lot of the other religions, they will at least acknowledge gender, whereas Sikhism is something that actually that doesn't take place. So it's almost one of the most equal kind of religions there is in terms of that, which was fascinating. So I think that, for instance, menstruating women are allowed to go to the Gurdwaras. So that's the kind of the place of worship for Sikhs. And again, they can pray, etc. So there's no actually restriction in terms of their movements inside or outside the house. So yeah, I think Sikhism really does boldly reject sexism. Obviously, in practice, in certain countries, that might not be the case. If that is, that's not to speak to all Sikhs. Like anything, you can't speak on behalf of all those people. But in terms of the actual religion, like that, it doesn't impose any restrictions on women there. So that's what I found very interesting, actually, is that they women aren't restricted when they menstruate in terms of due to their religion if they're Sikh.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know. Also, that they like actively reject sexism. That's very, very special.
Yeah.
So yeah, but also as you say, it depends sometimes on the country. So it's not only religion; it's about culture and. Yeah, it's complex how restrictions and menstrual discrimination or practices like arise. So maybe we can also talk about other communities as you are from the UK. I hope I mentioned that. What do you know about other communities, maybe the Christian community, the Muslim community, as you already said that in all religions there exist specific practices or do's and don'ts that refer to menstruation?
Yeah, so again, I looked into this further because it was not something I was familiar with. So I read a few papers research papers who have looked into religions and society and menstruation and kind of the treatment of it. So I found that like Christianity, the history of kind of menstrual taboo has been like a major reason to keep women from positions of authority in Christianity. So that's the same as well as Judaism as well, is that there's this belief that many Catholics that women shouldn't be allowed to have sexual intercourse, for instance, when they're menstruating. And then in Islam, in the Quran, it reads that they ask about menstruation and it says that it is an impurity, so keep away from women during it and do not approach them until they are cleansed. When they are cleansed, you may approach them as God has allowed. And then in Buddhism, again, a point of menstruation is that it's a natural physical excretion for women that they go through on a monthly basis, and nothing less or nothing more. However, in practice, this isn't followed. So that's quite interesting. In the actual scripture, it's very simple. This is what happens. Don't think anything of it. It is what it is. Whereas again, what they have found in this paper is that it's because of this kind of influence of Hinduism in Buddhism that a lot of temples don't allow women who are menstruating to come in. And so again, in Thailand, I think it's become very evident there is that, again, a lot of, and when I went there, to be fair, and same with other parts of Asia, I did notice that their kind of temples did actually have on a sign, you know, if you're menstruating, you can't come in. And I think that was probably my first exposure of it, was like, wow, really? And I'm not a religious person, so I've actually never had to think about it. I've had a very ignorant kind of experience of going into any place of worship anyway. So to read that, I thought, this is really fascinating. So I did read up more about it when I kind of was out there in the first place to understand more. And then again, with Hinduism, during menstruation, some women aren't allowed to enter the kitchen, the temples, they sleep in the daytime, they bathe, they wear flowers, they have sex, they can't touch males or females, they can't talk loudly, they can't touch certain things. So it's quite interesting looking at like the different religions. And obviously this isn't to speak to the treatment of how these people do it, but it's just interesting to read like what the religion says about menstruation. I think in terms of the UK, so the UK is very varied in terms of how many religions are there. And again, this is all to the best of my knowledge. I'm not by means an expert on it, but we kind of spoke about it the other evening, how it's all social norms and how we often kind of determine how a person behaves, what they believe. And unfortunately, rabbit UK is changed like that. So I do think that if there were people who follow a certain faith, what still might happen, it's maybe not the norm in the UK, because I think that behaviour would be challenged a lot, because again in the UK quite progressive in terms of while we don't talk about menstruation, it's very taboo still. I don't think it's at the level where we ask, oh, are you menstruating, you can't do this, etc. While that might happen, I think that there are a lot of kind of places of worship would have a lot of backlash if they tried to do that. So the UK this is a secular state. So again, religion doesn't really play too much of a role in it in terms of kind of the decisions that are being made in terms of, for instance, even if in Christian, again, predominantly a lot of the UK is going to be more Christian, but it doesn't have that kind of deciding impact in terms of like, okay, menstruating women can't go into church, etc. Or it's interesting because again, in the UK, I think that there is this taboo that you shouldn't have sex when you're menstruating. Now, I don't know. Again, like I said, I think that's something that I've been brought up with as well. That's not necessarily because of a kind of Christian background. I think it's just actually interesting to see that this is just maybe a world thing, that it's just seen as like, oh, this is disgusting, etc. You couldn't do that. But it's interesting because if in a country where religion plays no role, or particularly Christianity doesn't play any kind of influence there at all, and very little kind of Christianity is kind of exposed there, then actually maybe that country and those people who menstruate do have sex when they menstruate, and it's very normal. So it would be interesting to do kind of studies into actually how much influence does it play, even indirectly, because you're just brought up in this culture that, again, I went to a Church of England school, so I did go to a Christian primary school. We didn't talk about it at that age, but I've still always been around people who are Christian, even if I'm not myself, and it's still quite a big impact. So I think it is an interesting topic to see kind of how much your surroundings still play a role, even if the religion isn't kind of pushing it on you necessarily. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting also how the religion maybe in the past has influenced society and views in society. So thanks for that insight. Maybe on that, at this point, we can share the definition of menstrual discrimination to make that clear. So it's the definition by the Global South Coalition of Dignified Menstruation. It says that menstrual discrimination refers to taboos, shyness, restrictions, abuses, violence associated with menstruation throughout the life cycle of menstruators, which includes girls, women, trans men, queer people who menstruate. And it's a form of sexual and gender-based violence, and also a violation of human rights. So it's about our topic today. So the next question from my side would be about the role of the global north in the menstrual movement. So we know, as always in development work and this field, the Global North is very passionate to help the Global South also in menstrual health. And the global community that works on menstruation often shows a perception that those menstrual malpractices are only prevalent in the Global South. So also the efforts are directed to the Global South. And do you think that the menstrual movement from the Global North also examines and address the menstrual discrimination that is happening in the Global North? Like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that, yeah, in the last couple of months in particular, but we've spoken about a lot as an organization, and a lot of the organizations I'm working with who are based more in the Global North. I think that the Global North takes on this kind of Global North savior complex, this West is best mentality. And what we're trying to constantly address is this organization is this push for pluralism. And actually, you know, I've spoken to your organization about it before, in the one size doesn't fit all. And we spoke about, I did an event on Monday and we were speaking about the sustainable side of menstrual products, and actually how, you know, sustainable products aren't an option for everyone at the moment. And I think that that's where it's really interesting. This is where our idea of pluralism comes in the, if you want to progress, first of all, the UK is far from perfect, which I'll go into in a moment now, but like, if you want to progress, you really need to have conversations with people who are actually dealing with it at the time. So one of the organizations we were talking with are based in Kenya, and we were talking about, again, sustainable period products or menstrual products. And, you know, she was giving us a very real understanding that it's not an option for people in Kenya, because they haven't, or a lot of women there don't have access to toilets, don't have access to clean water, don't have access to, you know, any privacy in terms of when they're changing their products. So there's a lot, while you could be more sustainable, maybe less plastic in products, etc., using these reusable pads and stuff aren't going to be an option because you can't clean them properly. And there's also still, again, this dignified position where you kind of have to remove these products in quite a public place sometimes. So it's really fascinating. I think that that's something that what we're trying to push at the UN a lot of our different issues, and the same with the work I do on diversity, is that everyone ideally wants the same goal, you know, everyone wants to achieve some sort of equalness or some sort of environmental empowerment, whatever it is that you're focusing on, everyone usually wants the same thing. How people are going to get there are very different. With like the example we used in terms of the environment, is, for instance, if you went to a part of India, for instance, and you spoke to a Sikh person who hadn't really gone to university, maybe they'd lived in kind of the same village. If you told them in 30 years you're going to die because of climate change, that person might not change how they treat the environment, because their concept of death is very different to my concept of death. If someone said that to me, in 30 years you're going to die because of climate change, I'd have to really look myself in the mirror and think, what can I change in my life to make sure that that doesn't happen? It doesn't make me a better person. It doesn't make me right. It means that that threat or that kind of message has worked for me. It hasn't worked for that person. So if you want to convey that message to that person, you have to word it differently, because using the threat of death isn't something they accept, that that's karma for them, that's their life, you know. And so that's kind of where the UN, for instance, doesn't push that. And I think while it embraces this idea of kind of we listen to all these different countries around the world, and it does do that, but it doesn't actually listen to what they're saying. It's still a very universalistic mindset of like, this is still how we should do it. And it usually is this West is best, this northern hemisphere mentality, this West is best mentality. And this is the same with menstruation. I think we've got all of these organizations now who have created fantastic products and say, okay, yeah, we'll give loads to parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of South America. And while that's fantastic, they're like, well, they can't use them anyway. And also you're only giving them like very little compared to how many they might actually need. So you need to have the conversation, what suits them, and actually give them the power as well. So I think, and also looking at the UK, you know, there are so many issues with the UK and Europe as well. Is, for instance, menstrual products is one of the top 5 polluters in Europe. It's like tampons, applicators and stuff are always found on the beaches, for instance. Yet the European Commission, while it says it's going to tackle the top 10 polluters, doesn't want to talk about menstrual products. And you think, this is in the top 5 and you're not talking about it because of, again, the taboo. So it's like there's still a lot of kind of taboo, there's still a lot of shame around the product. So that's one thing that we really need to progress on if we're going to actually be better. Same with, again, this idea of period poverty, which I don't like the use in the name of. But in the UK, 40% of people who menstruate have to use toilet paper a lot of the time because they haven't got access to menstrual products. So that's another issue, is that we don't provide menstrual products very freely in the toilets. They might have to pay for them. But even in schools, young girls or people who menstruate might have to go all the way to, you know, their reception in the other side of the school to get a free product. And it's like, you know, you're 12 years old and you've just started your period. You have to walk all the way across the school to get a product. You know, it's stuff like that. You think, why don't you just put those products in the bathroom? Those are the people who need it, and they need it there. They don't need it halfway across the school. And then looking at the tampon tax as well, really interestingly, again, this mentality that the West is best, yet in the Northern Hemisphere, that's where the worst inflation on tax is for for menstrual products. Finland is taxed in 24% of their products, like has a 24% rate. Sweden and Norway is 25%, whereas in countries in Africa it's on average about 18 to 20, but in Africa it's home to 20% of the countries who have completely eliminated the tampon tax anyway, and it's home to the first country who did it in 2004, which was Kenya. So you think, well, they're actually a lot more progressive than we are in the global north. So there's a lot to learn both ends. So it's fascinating, but I think, you know, we to solve any problem, this mentality that one is better than the other and you kind of have to like educate the other all the time needs to go, because it's just, you're never going to fix anything otherwise.
Yeah, I've also made the same observation that to learn about how progressive African countries are regarding menstruation, because they see it as an issue, and probably in countries in Europe it's often just ignored. And maybe, so we talked about those menstrual practices and restrictions that often are thought to exist more in the global south, but yeah, in the global north, maybe those forms of discriminations are different. They are less tangible. So you it's more about stigma and shame. And for example, there has been a study in the UK which says, or found out, that nearly 78% of girls who used to be very sporty quit sports when they enter puberty, and they 78% of those girls name menstruation or having their period as a reason for that. And it's of course about pain, but also about self-consciousness. So that's like a thing that shows that we also have a discriminative environment in the global north. Do you think that that is acknowledged by the global menstrual movement, by organizations that work on menstruation?
I think that the ones I have spoken to now are very aware of it. I think it's interesting. When it comes to the menstrual movement, if you include manufacturers into that, especially the ones that are promoting maybe the disposable products, you know, Tampax and Always, for instance, in the UK and around a lot of the global north, they are the leading kind of products. It's funny, like, looking at them, because it's just like, well, actually, I don't think you are addressing it, because you have the option to progress. At the end of the day, like from a young age in the UK, for instance, we associate our period with a brand now. You say, have you got a Tampax? You know, people visualize, I think, quite quickly Always as like, oh, have you got a pad? They might not say have you got an Always, but they will visualize like an Always pad and stuff like that. And it is slowly starting to progress. We've working with so many organizations who are providing products that look exactly the same as the ones that people were growing up with. But instead of the plastic being plastic in the pads, it's actually cornstarch, which is a lot better for the environment. And again, they're going back to like cardboard and kind of, just not plastic effectively for the tampon applicators and stuff. And again, the cotton that they're using is a lot better for your body. Again, a lot of the cotton from these other brands is coming from parts of the world where they're using a lot of fertilizer on this cotton that they're picking, and you're putting fertilizer into your body. So there's not been technically a study to tie the two together between, you know, cancer or any other, you know, extreme health issue and using these products. But if you think about it, you're putting in a couple every single month, a couple of times a month, and you're holding in there sometimes up to 8 hours, that's probably not going to be very good for you. And let alone then the human rights side of these kind of the cotton that's coming from these products. A lot of it has come from, and especially these leading brands, has come from China in Xinjiang, where the genocide is happening. It's the labor workers there, the people who the Uyghurs are the ones who are picking this cotton. So you think indirectly, while you're buying this product, you're also supporting a genocide, you know. And I think that people, if they knew that, they wouldn't do it. And so luckily these other brands are really taking over this and stuff like that, and they are addressing these issues. That's how they promote themselves, is the environment in the UK, which is fantastic. So I think that the ones I've worked with, they are addressing these issues, and they are addressing, like, taboo is always, you know, it's almost like these three, which is similar to your organization, but it's these 3 points of education, access, and stigma, or eliminating stigma, and making sure that you bring back language and stuff like that. So I think that every organization I've worked with, part and part, has effectively addressed all of those, that those are the biggest issues. So I think that, like, I am feeling hopeful. I think there's this massive movement. I think this decade is going to show that, like, okay, we're really going to challenge these things on a national level or international level, very local community level. But I think, you know, the UK is interesting. We've got, like, in England, we've got this period task force, right, which is like the UK government has a group of people who decide where the money goes for menstrual products. We've got Always, or I can't remember the name, but someone who's very high up in Always, effectively, who's chair of the board. So England is never going to spend the money given for menstrual products on sustainable ones, because obviously their chair is someone who doesn't make sustainable ones. So they're always going to be pushing their products. And again, that's where it's an issue. And you think politics comes into it all the time. And so does business and stuff like that. And that's where we're kind of, one of the women we're working with on the environmental side, she's really pushing. The consumer hasn't really got much of a choice, because the consumer will pick what they need, especially with products like that. They're like, my period started, I need something, that's fine. So you have to really hold the, you know, the manufacturer accountable. And that's what I think is starting to happen. People are speaking out about it. People are becoming a lot more aware. But again, it's also checking your own privilege in the UK. If you can afford to do that, fantastic. But obviously, the UK is a very privileged country to be able to make those choices. As I mentioned, there's a lot of other countries, you haven't got that choice. You haven't got that privilege. So we can't be holding them accountable. And I think that's where most organizations I've worked with are very aware of that. But that is something that people need to check as well, is that, like, okay, check your own place. If your place is privileged, fantastic. Don't call out other countries. You could recommend how it could get better, obviously share resources, but don't say you're doing awful things for the environment. You need to be very aware of, like, this is what the circumstances are on the ground, and dignity comes first. And that's making sure that someone can go to school or go to work with, you know, while they're menstruating, and not feel like they're bleeding through all their clothes and stuff, and they feel safe, they feel kind of, you know, empowered by it, or at least, you know, protected by it.
Yeah, I understand that. Probably it's still something more about more than that. So I think even if you have access to the best products that fit you, that you feel secure, more secure with, I think for many girls also in Europe, in the northern hemisphere, still there is, like, always the fear of, what is if there's a stain on my clothes, what will people say? So maybe that's even a further issue that also needs, as you say, it needs education. It needs maybe also education of boys and men, that that girls and women are not alone with that topic, and other menstruators, and that they don't need to feel ashamed. So I think that's something that is similar on the whole globe. So all the menstruators have to suffer from that. So do you think this global menstrual movement, or the NGOs, they do enough to address this, all those forms of menstrual discrimination, or do you think that they focus maybe too much on one side, like just distributing products or something like that?
Yeah, I think that what I've learned from working with it is that I've tried to go to, like, as many talks as possible, listening to different organizations and what they focus on, etc. I think that obviously organizations are going to focus on their expertise, and a lot of the time, if they're maybe focusing on the hygienic side, in the sense of making sure there is safe access to clean water and stuff like that, then obviously that is their prime focus. I think where it's important is, first of all, I think what I've learned very much with our organisation is this, I'm the only one in that department. We've got volunteers and interns who are fantastic, but at the end of the day, it's only me who kind of does all of it. So I have to pick my battles in terms of what we focus on, because I physically on my own can't address all of it. And if I do try to address every part of the issue, I'm going to really spread myself very thin and not do it justice. So you do need to pick and choose. I think that that's what's amazing about a growing business, is that then you can be choosing, you can pick different departments to focus on, okay, education, access, just, making our own product, or at least supporting an organization that's very sustainable, very healthy, etc., and perfect for these people who live here. And you work throughout that, but and also looking at the finance side of things and making things a little bit more empowered in that sense. Zen Africa, who are based in Kenya, have done that perfectly. I think that they've been around now for 15 years, and their founder, again, very intelligent woman, but she has tried to cover so much of it. And I think that, they're trying to progress a bit further on the environmental side now that they've addressed the issue of, like, okay, we're trying to make sure that these products are out there for people. So they are kind of slowly, as they grow further, they've almost created this hierarchy of needs, and they've recognized for their country and the people they're working with, it being environmentally friendly is not last, but it's not the first priority. The first priority is making sure they have access to it. So I think that, in an ideal world, every organization that's working on this and every NGO would address all of these issues, but in a realistic world, it's not going to happen. I think what I love about NGOs and why it's different to business is that if you're all NGOs working towards menstrual empowerment, or whatever your title is, but effectively making sure you've got a fair menstruation and people do it with dignity, etc., effectively everyone's going for the same thing. So you might as well work together, right? No, you're not. It's not a business where you're competing against your competitor, right? You've got the same idea, you're both selling the same thing, you're competing against each other. Whereas, like, if you can work together with NGOs, I think that it's the same idea of business, you're all working with the same thing, but you might as well share all your resources. And I think that that's what we're trying to encourage at the UN to do, is while we're trying to show that you do need this global governing body to set a basic level of curriculum, to first of all set that curriculum, you need to be speaking to delegates and NGOs from nearly every single country to make sure, okay, how can we set this curriculum that makes sure that you fit it for every country who it's going to teach, which is hopefully, everyone in the world, but at least all the member states. But then with this global body, what you're doing is you're creating this network of, representatives. So it's almost like a UN within the UN, you're status of all these kind of different menstrual NGOs, so that you can work on, like, okay, we focus mostly on the environment side of things, or we focus mostly on the financial sides, etc. And at least you can share them. And like we said, like, it's not always going to fit the same country. You might be working with some people who are looking at the environmental side, and their sewage system, their system in general, everything is completely different to another country. They're not going to work together very well, but at least you can kind of share some resources and help them grow and help yourself kind of become a little bit more environmentally mindful. So it's a lot of, like, using your initiative, I think, and intuition. But I think it's going the right way. I think that, everyone's got the right mindset. It's just having these conversations. It's learning a little bit more about, oh, I really like how you think about it. We haven't thought about it like that.
You said before that you are hopeful for this menstrual movement, and so maybe we can be hopeful that, as you said, not every organization can address all issues and can address all needs that menstruators have, but we can be hopeful that in the landscape of organizations there can be more diversity, and also organizations that focus on stigma. And this, maybe I'm repeating myself now, this global governing body that you are suggesting for the UN, that can maybe in this sphere, it can be an opportunity to make sure that all kinds of organizations are represented, so that all needs of menstruators are addressed at the end. I think that could be a great opportunity.
Yeah, hopefully. I think everyone seems to agree with it, the need for it. So hopefully that's something that everyone can start working towards and just doing, but yeah.
Yeah. So as we you just talked, you started to talk also about menstrual products. We wanted also to talk about that, as they are very important. And you also, so we apply that approach, the 3P approach, to include people, so the menstruators and their choices, include the planet, so to make sure that products are environmentally friendly, and the profit, so which means that products should be accessible financially for menstruators. And I think that refers to the dignity in the sphere of products. So you already mentioned an example of a great company that tried to implement, as I understood from Kenya, implement that approach. So maybe again, how do you think we can ensure this dignity, ensure that all those parts are covered when we are working on, for example, also distributing free products?
Yeah, I think that, and that's what I loved about this organization, was that, you know, how you defined dignity, you did really cover it in the sense of, you know, people. So it does cover the people who menstruate, obviously, first and foremost, but the planet, but also then the profit, but also dignity falls into all of those. And actually, you know, as I mentioned, with companies that are trying to be more sustainable, and this goes wider than just menstrual product, goes to anything sustainable nowadays. It's kind of like, that might be good for the environment, but who's making these products? Especially if you're in the global north, are you sending it to parts of China, parts of different parts of Asia and Africa, paying these workers next to nothing? And I think that that's what's really shocking about menstrual products. And actually the issue is, you can't, if you've not got the option there. And I think especially with menstrual products, obviously, it's a nice idea to try something new, but when your period comes, when you start menstruating, especially if you've got side effects in terms of a stomach ache or a headache or lower back pains, whatever it is, and you just don't, you know, feel great in yourself, the last thing you want to do is try a load of new products, create this anxiety for yourself that they might not work or they hurt to put in because it's the first few times you've tried it. So that's what I loved about the organization. And there are, I'm sure, others who are doing it, but they did take the basic products that, at least in the UK, we've been brought up using, and they've just made them as sustainable as possible. But I think it is bringing in this element that you could make that so much cheaper if you got the cotton from somewhere else. So obviously what they're doing as an organization, they're not relying massively on profit. You know, they obviously have to survive, but it's not necessarily an organization that is, you know, got a massive income and a massive turnover every year. It's not that. What the organization does is, what it relies on is obviously, you know, for instance, county councils, workplaces buying these products and giving them out for their workers, or for the people who are using those bathrooms and stuff like that. So I think that that's where it's really important, is as a manufacturer, they really need to take into account all of these different aspects. And then for the person who menstruates, again, as we mentioned, you need to think about, who are you addressing? What's your audience? If it's a country where actually they haven't got access to clean water and stuff like that, don't give them a moon cup, or don't give them a menstrual cup. Don't give them reusable pads that you have to wash, because they're like, well, how are they going to do that? So I think that it is being very aware of kind of where you're selling them. But I think that that is where dignity comes into it, is that, like, as you've mentioned, you really need to make sure that the person menstruating is dignified, but also the planet. We're dignifying our own planet. I think as well, is that in certain countries, if you're using all of these pads in like bushes and stuff, they're just putting their pads somewhere. That's not because the user wants everyone to see their blood and see their menstrual pad. It's because there's nowhere else to put it. So it's kind of like, that's, it's good for the environment in the sense of changing how we dispose of them to make sure it's sustainable, but also for yourself. I think that, like, we've been brought up very much of like just throwing products away all the time because we're ashamed of the blood that's on them. In the UK, people will flush tampons all the time and we'll throw all of our products away. And it's like, well, actually, if you're in the opportunity where you can start washing them, you become a little bit more in tune of like, oh, I bled a lot this month, or the color of my blood is slightly different, and you learn so much more about your body. Instead, we're discarding it straight away before we even look. So I think that where it comes in with the planet side of it, it also comes personal as well. Even if you don't care about the planet side and stuff, at the end of the day, personally, you don't want to be living in an environment where your tampon applicators or your pads or everything is just kind of washed up on the beach or in your bushes and stuff. You want to be in a place where you're like, actually, I'm proud of where I live. I feel safe where I live. At the end of the day, blood is blood. You know, if someone's got HIV and stuff, you do need to keep that in mind. It does need to be disposed of safely. Like, it's not disgusting, it's not unhygienic, but equally you do need to be sensible. It's, at the end of the day, it's someone's blood. If you don't know that person, you don't know what's going on, you know. So I think it's yeah, I think, you know, when people say dignified menstruation, it's like, oh, okay, whatever, what does that mean? People feeling like confident, but it's like, no, it's so much wider, which I think your organization has presented so well, is that it covers a complete wide berth of literally everything that a menstrual product or menstruation really tries to address.
Yes, yes. Thanks also for that insight. So as we talked about dignified menstruation, so as that's the approach the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation like follows. What do you understand as dignified menstruation? How would you define it? What is the most important component of it?
I think definitely the most important will always have to be the person you menstruate, because I think how I will view it is very much, you know, I'll think to my cousin's 12, so I don't think she started menstruating yet, but it won't be long until she does. And I think that actually she talks about it very candidly now, and I love that that's maybe school, it's hopefully like how I speak to her about it. But at the end of the day, like, she was talking about like some bullies at school the other day, nothing to do with menstruation. Yeah, so I think when I was speaking to her the other day, it became very real that, you know, people do get made fun of all the time. I was talking to my boyfriend, he said that when he was in school, someone dropped their tampon and they called her Tampax for the rest of her school time, right? She just dropped a tampon on the way to toilet. You know, it's your kids, and I think that kids really latch on to stuff like that. So I think that dignified menstruation does have to start with the people who are doing it. And, you know, due to obesity levels, the UK and the US and other parts of Europe and North America in particular, kids are starting menstruation at the age of 7 because their body thinks they're older than they are because of the estrogen levels, because they have got more fat on them. So as young as 7, that's crazy. Like, I remember learning about it in year 6, which is what, you're like 11 years old for when I was at school. And I only knew one girl who was the year above me who had started it. And that was the first time I'd heard about it when she told me. I thought, this sounds crazy. You know, I probably should have learned about it younger. But I think it's how you teach these young people, making sure that the teacher doesn't bring their own trauma or their own stigma to it as well. So if you've got a teacher teaching you about menstruation and they're like, oh, these are the code words we use, make sure you hide your products, you know, stuff them up your sleeve, whatever it is. And it's kind of like, kids absorb information first and foremost. You know, they're in a position where they're like, you see your teachers, your parents as these gods. You know, you think that everything is perfect, you believe everything they say, so you absorb all of their information. So I think, and you absorb their attitudes towards the product, towards the topic as well. So I think that that's where like the dignified bit first and foremost has to come in. Is, and I've spoken to, you know, girls who are 16 so candidly about menstruation, about miscarriage, about abortions, about birth control. And, you know, they were taken back for a second because they were like, I've never spoken about it so freely before. And again, to be fair, all of these girls were Sikh, and they did say that it's just not very normal for them to speak to their parents about it and stuff like that. They learn a lot about it through their friends. I've got another friend who's in her 30s. And again, she's also a Sikh woman. She said that the first time she understood what a tampon was when she was in her 20s. She'd seen it, but she'd never used it. She'd never been, you know, she had to learn herself. So I think that it's making sure that we just create an environment where people just don't feel gross about it. They feel like actually quite empowered by, oh, I'm menstruating now. You know, people do celebrate when people start menstruating because they're like, you're a woman now, etc. You're whatever you attach to it. And it's like, you should start to empower it. And, you know, they don't have to go tell everyone. That's up to that person's choice if they want to talk about it. It's your own personal stuff, right? But we should talk about period pains. We should talk about what it looks like we would talk about any other illness. If we've got a cold, or if we've got, you know, a sore stomach or anything. Granted, you might not tell a stranger on the street, and you might not tell half your class at school, but you would tell your parents if you felt ill. You would tell your friends, oh, I've got this headache and it's, you know, at the front and it's not, you know, you would start talking about your symptoms. And that's how you start to just become a lot more, I guess, empowered by it. And it becomes quite dignified, is because you're like, oh, okay, like this actually isn't normal, that I'm bleeding for a really long time, or that I'm actually, you know, in a lot of pain. That's how you start to give people a bit more empowerment when it comes to their menstruation. So I think it starts with the person. I think it starts with the education side. I think the products are obviously so important, and I've been in a position where I've been so lucky that, granted, I've used toilet paper as a substitute so many times, but I am aware that I've got products very close by. I can afford them if I need to. I can change them in a toilet, very private place. So I recognise I'm very privileged. So that's why maybe for me, the dignified bit for me isn't the product necessarily, it's the education, because I've been brought up in this world where I know that I can use products very freely.
Yeah, I see that. Also maybe something to add. It's really crazy how most girls like learn at school about menstruation, like in 6th grade even, which is, as you say, quite late, and then you stop talking about it. So until maybe for us, it may be until we're 20 and we feel more empowered, or but to that age, it's like a taboo topic, and we don't know about our problems. We don't talk about it. So what would you suggest to the global menstrual community, to the organizations, to make their work more dignified or more holistic, if that's possible?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think that it's, with regards to the manufacturers, it's making sure that they provide a choice. So I'm not here to say everyone needs to take a sustainable product, for instance. First, it should be a product that's at least healthy for them, you know, i.e. not using cotton that's got a load of chemicals in, or not using cottons and tampons that, you know, will bit off a bit in your body, because that's not healthy. That's just not healthy. That's not good for you at all. So I think that with regards to manufacturers, it's also to stop capitalizing from this kind of menstrual movement, because everyone is now, or not everyone, but, you know, a lot more people are talking about menstruation in such an empowered way. The manufacturers are only profiting from this, right? Obviously, there are, for instance, the companies I've spoken about who are fantastic. They should profitize from it because they're doing great work. But always Tampax, you know, these other companies who aren't changing their products at all. They've just made a product, they've kept it there, you know. I'm not to say that they haven't developed it. I'm sure they have. I haven't looked into it enough, but they haven't really changed, like, oh, we're going to now be environmentally friendly, because they know people are always going to buy them. Because in shops, even in the UK, like, I've tried to really take note of it now. In the pharmacy downstairs I live like next to a corner shop. I go into these shops, the only products they sell are always in Tampax, because these pharmacy and the corner shop, they inflate the prices a bit anyway, so they're not a supermarket price, they're a bit higher. Obviously, they're trying to sell then the cheapest product for a bit of a higher price, so that that shop can profit from it as much as possible. So I think that it's really calling out the manufacturers to be a little bit more kind of holistic and dignified with their work, because, you know, they're getting free marketing when people start talking about menstruation all the time and stuff like that, because indirectly or directly, they're just getting all of this free marketing, and they can just jump on it straight away, because people are talking about the product. So I think that they really need to start being just a lot more aware of what the product damage does to their own users, but also the damage in terms of how much they've profited from people menstruating. That's where I've got a big issue is that these companies, the CEO and stuff like that, which are all men in terms of Tampax and Always, have profited so much from people menstruating, something that's so natural. And don't get me wrong, you have to pay for it. Someone needs to make it. I get that point of it. But it's like, maybe stop exploiting your own workers, i.e., you know, picking products that are coming from a place where there's a genocide. Maybe start being a lot more environmentally mindful, and also better for the customers in terms of the products you use. Like, actually spend some of that money and develop your product, or, you know, just do something a little bit more beneficial to other parts of the world where, again, they haven't even got access to products.
I see. Yeah, that's a very important thing, to also hold the private sector accountable. Also, what I have experienced in Germany, we're mostly like, the brand you also use as a name for tampons is like OB, and they have like, they developed also environmentally sustainable products, but they are way more expensive. So that again doesn't give menstruators a choice often. So at least many menstruators.
Yeah.
And I think it's also probably about the marketing, so the own marketing they are doing, how they are promoting menstruation, if they see it as promoted as something unhygienic or something dirty. So they are like, I don't know the word.
Yeah, I agree. I think these leading products, for instance, they advertise their products on TV or social media, but they use blue liquid, not red. You don't even have to use blood, just use a red dye. You know, no one's asking you, please, can you use someone's blood from, you know, their menstruation? They're just saying, don't make it blue. No one's bleeding blue. Like, if they are, there's a real big problem here.
That's true. Yeah. So about your own work and the organization where you work, what challenges do you face when working on menstruation? Is it specifically difficult in comparison to other topics?
I think because of the kind of conviction I've had with it, I found it quite easy in terms of like, I've been very up and go, let's do this. And people are, I know who to, because I think I followed it for a long time before then, I know who to reach out to quite quickly. So maybe if I was starting completely from scratch, I would have found an issue. I can't say I found very many challenges in terms of, for instance, taboo. I've not come across, you know, like I said, I work with more directly my director and a colleague of mine, both male. My director, again, in his 60s or so, hasn't got a daughter, you know, hasn't got people he talks about this with. So I think that for me, I didn't feel uncomfortable talking to them about it. I just started talking about it, and they don't make me feel uncomfortable about it. They might feel quite uncomfortable about it, but they don't show off that way. So I think I have been quite lucky in terms of like, I've not been faced with too many challenges. I think like any project anyone does, I think, especially if it's something that yeah, maybe you're speaking to a certain, only half of the population, right? You're speaking to only people who menstruate, predominantly women. So I think that maybe is the issue to an extent, is that like, while men might engage with the conversation, they do. Like I'll speak to even people outside of work. I speak to them loads and they will ask me about it. So they're not interested. But I guess at the end of the day, they don't benefit if not directly, and that's nothing on them, but they're not going to benefit if we get rid of the tampon tax, if we do this or we do this. Maybe they would if they had a daughter, or, you know, someone who menstruates as their own child, then yeah. So I think that's where it's interesting, is that, okay, maybe people stop listening slightly, but I think it's using your initiative, is making sure that where I've managed to engage people is talk about the environment, because that might be something they're more focused on. Or if they're more focused on you know, discrimination and diversity, it's kind of like talking about that, and actually how it's very different in terms of kind of different countries will be treated very differently around this topic. And so I think that it's so far it's gone very well. I think it's trying to get the audience to come to things like webinars and stuff like that and engage in the conversation. But once you've kind of got that going, I think that it's a lot better. And luckily, again, everyone's been so welcoming in terms of the organizations that already exist anyway, and I've loved learning from people, and I've loved talking to people about it and sharing my ideas or my organization's ideas. So I think that like, I've not faced too many challenges, which is great. You know, ask me in 6 months or a year, and again, at the United Nations level, we've only started pushing stuff there, so I can't say that like time to respond yet. Again, in like maybe a year's time, if they've just not engaged in it at all, which is another issue with the UN anyway. They don't tend to engage too much with NGOs that much. So that's what we're trying to do, is again work with member states, so that delegates from Kenya, from Nigeria, from all these countries who have eliminated the tampon tax can actually start speaking about it as well, because they obviously hold a lot more stature than I do as an NGO who they haven't heard of. So we are trying to like build up a bit more of an army in that sense. But so that might be where it's interesting, is that the challenges face, and we've maybe not quite come to those yet. But so far, I think I'm very positive about it all. But yeah, maybe ask me in a couple of months and it might be very different.
And that's good to hear. And it will be very interesting to learn about your experience with lobbying at the UN and what the outcomes will be. So yes, I also want to talk more about your lobby work at the UN and in general the work of the Human Rights Group. So you are also making statements at the UN Human Rights Council, where you refer to different sources of for human rights that address women's rights or menstruation. And one of them is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW. And we as an organization, we found that the CEDAW does not really consider menstruation as a global women's rights issue. And so in the reports of CEDAW, often menstrual practices are mentioned, but they are described as a harmful traditional practice, which implies that it only exists in certain parts of the world, which is not representative of this global problem. So the whole severity and the dimension and how widespread the stigma and the discrimination around menstruation is not acknowledged. And yeah, from working with all those documents which show human rights and making the connection to menstruation, do you think that those documents like the CEDAW do sufficiently address menstruation and menstrual discrimination especially?
I think so we made a statement which we played at the end of the week, actually, in a few days, and it's items. So they have the Human Rights Council that happens 3 times a year. They have 10 items in the Human Rights Council, and item 8 is the implementation of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, which was created in 1993. So 30 years next year. What I did with that was basically, because like you said, there wasn't a clear avenue for me to go down where we can talk about menstruation in terms of tampon tax, or we can talk about menstruation in terms of a need for better education on it. So what I did was read through the Vienna Declaration in terms of, looked at it from the perspective of women's rights, perspective of child's rights, perspective of education and work. So all of these different avenues. And what I found was that to answer your question, no, it doesn't address menstrual education or menstrual kind of needs and stuff like that. What it does talk about, so in section 3, subsection 41 of the Vienna Declaration, what it talks about is it mentions the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and which talks about, on the basis of equality between men and women, a woman's right to have accessible and adequate healthcare and the widest range of family planning services, as well as equal access to education at all levels. So what we did with that section, in our statement, we said this is why we need better education on menstruation, because it's a woman's right and a person's right to have access on, the basic level of healthcare. That is as basic as it gets, because it's the reason why everyone's here is because people menstruate. 50% of the world do it. So, that was where we kind of worked it in. So I think that that's where you kind of have to be quite smart with it and have a little bit more like maybe of a legal head to it, or of more of a political head to it, where you're like, okay, where can we reinterpret this information? If you talk about healthcare, it comes out under healthcare. And we've done the same when it comes to the tampon tax. We've read statements where it talks about kind of again in section 3, but subsection 39 in the Vienna Declaration, it urges the eradication of all forms of discrimination against women, both hidden and overt. Well, having a tampon tax is gender-based discrimination right there in front of you. Like it clearly is. In so many countries where they don't tax where they tax menstrual products, they don't tax Viagra for men who have erectile dysfunction. They also don't tax hair loss cream to try and bring hair back, because 40%, I can't remember what it is, I think it's like 70% of men will lose it around 40, whereas obviously women it's a lot later. So you think, well, this is quite clear comparison. Every woman or person who menstruates needs products. They need to buy these products to do it. You can't hold it in, like you just can't. I'm here to take away the tax on Viagra and hair loss, like that. I'm not against that, but you can't do one and not the other, and also you can still live your life day to day without using Viagra. You can go bald, your life will still be the same. Mental health wise and stuff, there's obviously loads of different evidence there, but I just think if we're going to put it in hierarchy order, menstrual products probably come at the top, because you can't stop that. You stop yourself going to work, you stop yourself going to school, you stop yourself living your life for nearly 7 days, because you just have to sit and bleed effectively. Do you know what I mean? If you've got nothing to keep it there. So I think it's just interesting, like this is very clear gender-based discrimination. Why it still exists in certain countries is astonishing. And there's only 21 countries who have eliminated it. Some have like got the pink tax where they've like decreased it, but it's still there. So that's one thing that we've tried to work it in, is kind of, again, like I said, you just need to be a little bit, take a break and take a step back and think, okay, how can we read this and interpret it so it fits menstruation?
Yeah, as you say, it needs like reinterpretation. So maybe we can say that even if there is a special document that is about the abolishing all men's discrimination against women, maybe it should be addressed more explicitly, so that you do great work, but that we don't have to do it, like explain people this is discrimination. So maybe that's
it's almost having your own section on menstrual health and fertility health and whatever else that falls into that category.
So that would be great, so that and maybe also is on the same page as you are, that the taxation is discriminative against one gender. So about the work that you do, about your organization, what are your long-term goals?
So for Sikh Human Rights Group in general, my colleagues, we've got 2 in Geneva who work kind of part-time, 1 in New York. So they look a lot about they were very involved in the farmers' protest in India. So they're doing a lot of like food security and stuff like that. My other colleagues doing a lot of environmental stuff, neurodiversity stuff, TNCs. The work I do, so the menstrual products, menstrual empowerment, but also diversity. So diversity, what we're trying to do is get the United Nations to adopt a declaration on diversity. That's like our long-term goal that our director came up with before I started. And that's something that I've tried to take on for him, is trying to lobby for that. They've got 2 declarations that acknowledge diversity and do fight for it. But again, like I mentioned earlier, they're very universalistic. It's very much a one kind of narrow gaze, and it's very much this hegemon, which is we see in the UK, right, which is hegemon is very much white, cisgender, middle class male a lot of the time. Anything that doesn't fit into this identity is kind of the other, and that's very much kind of how a lot of the declarations that exist at the UN have been very much framed from a lot of the colonial countries. So again, that's kind of one of the issues. That's what we want, is this new declaration to have a little bit more of a kind of rights-based approach, this kind of positive, again, instead of this idea of let's tolerate one another, it's kind of like, no, let's thrive. And that's, I think, a very different kind of very positive approach, and people can showcase how they have done that in different countries. So that's one of the projects. In terms of our long-term goal with our menstrual products, I think that it would be at the United Nations to have them adopt under the UN Women, adopt some form of body that sets a basic level of curriculum that every country needs to do. I think then on the tampon tax side, we recognize obviously the UN can't, because countries are sovereign, you can't tell a country you have to eliminate the tampon tax. And obviously they will face challenges. France have said they would never do it because they profit too much from it. So what the United Nations need to do is create a step-by-step guide on how a country can eliminate the tampon tax, what challenges they will face, how to overcome those challenges. Like I said, we've got 21 countries who have already done it, so it's doable. And also it's a complete range of countries who have got very different GDPs. We've got the UK that prides itself on being quite high up in terms of their GDP. Then we've got other countries in parts of kind of Asia and Africa where their GDP is lower. So you really kind of have got a comparison. We think, okay, well, it's not only the rich countries who can do it, it's not also just the poorer countries who can do it. So it is doable, but it's just kind of like the UN needs to work with the countries who have done it to make sure that it's that the other countries will start to do it and show that it's a gender-based discrimination. So you maybe should start doing it to be a little bit more equal. I think as well, it's making sure that the UK doesn't include in its tampon tax, so it still taxes things like period panties, pads, like underwear that you would wash. It still taxes those because it's seen as clothing, so it's seen as a luxury item. And it's like, I'm not being funny, I don't think many people are wearing those for luxury. They will wear them when they need to, but it's not it's not out of choice. I mean, they're lovely, I'm sure, but you're not buying them because, oh, I really want to spend £20 on underwear. It's like, I'm buying them because I want to be more environmentally friendly when I menstruate. So I think those are our long-term goals, is that work and just work with organizations like yourself globally to just learn as much as we can and help where we can, but also have other countries help us, you know.
That's great. Great. I also learned a lot today. So I have an additional question, which is more about sexual and reproductive health. So there are lots of publications and efforts on the integration of menstruation or menstrual health into sexual and reproductive health and rights. And you have also made a statement that says that menstruation should be treated as a standalone topic that should probably also be taught to children at a younger age than education on sexual and reproductive health and rights education is taught. So what do you think, should menstruation and especially the education on that topic be integrated into SRHR, or rather be, maybe you can talk about what arguments are there for integrating it or not?
Yeah, I think again, it's something that's a little bit more new to me because of just the work I've done. But I think what I did find fascinating is if a lot of people we've worked with, you know, talk about how periods or menstruation is sexualized. And I do agree that I think in the UK, for instance, as we mentioned, and I don't know if it's the same in Germany or whatever, but you learn about menstruation in our sex education class. So when I learned about or from what I remember, when I learned about menstruation in year 6, so when I was 10 to 11 years old, I also watched a video of someone giving birth. I learned how a baby is born and stuff. Obviously, they're all linked, right? You menstruate, it's the egg fertilizing, not fertilizing, etc., is passing through the ovaries. Well, no. However, people as young as 7 and as young as 10 and as young as 13 maybe aren't thinking about sex. They're not thinking about that. And I think this is where so in the UK, I think it's starting to change, but in the UK, private schools, so schools that you have to pay to go to, and faith schools, they have the option to opt out of certain subjects. So obviously not the core ones like maths, English, etc., but they have the option to opt out of PSHE or sex education. A lot of these schools, a lot of these parents, particularly more faith schools, will make sure their kids don't go to sex education. Now, if you're only learning about menstruation or male puberty, because again, obviously we don't talk about that enough either, and I don't know enough about it. And if I had a little boy, you know, I'd have to read a lot about it. You know, I don't talk about it enough. I don't understand it enough. But anyway, if we learn about menstruation and male puberty in sex education alone, if these kids are being pulled out because their parents don't want them to learn sex education, when are they going to learn it? They're never going to learn about it. And that's an issue if you're a boy, but particularly an issue if you're a girl, because you're like, well, what's happening to my body? If I don't feel comfortable talking to my parents about it, which, you know, even I don't, and I think my parents are very open. Again, there's no cultural reason why we don't talk about it. It's just a bit taboo. If you've got a religious aspect to it or a cultural aspect to it, you think, we don't talk about this. This is like a no, talk about, especially if you've got the faith side to it as well. Then obviously, when are you ever going to learn it? You're going to have to Google it. You're going to have to ask your friends. And again, that's still the confidence of asking your friends. And I think it was in Kenya where a young girl started her period. She started menstruating, and she, again, bled through her clothes. She didn't know what was going on with her, and she committed suicide. And that's happened on a lot of occasions. You know, I know that I've spoken to a lot of people who have either been in that position where they felt very suicidal, or I've read about it in terms of they have committed suicide because of it, because it is quite terrifying. If you don't know what's going on with you, it's quite terrifying. So I think that, yeah, that's where it's quite interesting, is making sure that there is this option to learn about menstruation at a younger age, where you just learn like this is what's quite natural. Obviously, again, and this is where it's interesting in terms of, I think the UK has gotten better with how they teach it. So they do still teach it as to like a topic together. It's a lot harder to drop out of that topic. So I can't criticize it. And also I know that if you did criticize it, it's taken so long for them to get this far that if you start picking it apart now, it's like, well, all of this hard work we've done is for nothing. While it could be better, it's still really good. Whereas obviously there are countries where, you know, child marriage is an issue. So if a girl is starting menstruating, again, as young as 7, as young as 12, or any age really, if that's then the attitude that they should start to have, that they can now have children. If you're linking menstruation to I can now give birth, they're going to have, you know, these people marrying them from a very young age, and they're going to start getting pregnant at a really young age. I think again, Zenit Africa was saying that in Kenya, the average age for a girl was about 12 and a half when they started having sex, because again, that was linked to when they started menstruating. And a lot of the people they were having sex with were at least about, I think it was at least average of 3 to 5 years older than them. So it's kind of like there's no consent there. They're not old enough to even give consent, So it's just interesting that I think if we had this global governing body set in a basic curriculum, it's then down to each country to choose if they want to teach it with sex education or not. And I think that, they were saying in Kenya that they do face a lot of backlash from the government because they didn't want to teach sex education. So they thought, okay, we'll teach about menstruation, but not linked to sex education. That's the same with so many other countries around the world. And, that's what it is. That's what it is in that country. I'm not here to say that's right or wrong. What I'm doing is saying, okay, well, let's address actually making sure that you teach menstruation on its own. Don't sexualize it. You don't have to talk about sex. You just say, this is what's happening to your body. This is what's normal. This is maybe not normal. This is how you clean it. This is how you deal with it. But this, so I think it's fascinating. It's not something I've, have thought about too long. It's maybe the last 6 months that we've really started to have that conversation a little bit more and read into it a bit further.
And it was also very interesting for me to see that perspective, because I've read so much about the integration, and of course it makes sense if there are already programs who that educate on sexual and reproductive health and rights. It makes sense to integrate menstruation into that. But if they don't exist, as you say, there are occasions where they don't exist, where they are not allowed or something. Then of course it makes sense to make sure that at least there's a conversation about menstruation and in general what it means. Okay, so now we come rather to the end of our webinar. So we also talked about dignified menstruation, as it is also the approach that our organization follows. Do you think that is a concept that you would like to advocate for in the future, or advocate for more?
Yeah, 100%. I remember kind of when I first learned about your organization and like just hearing about it a lot more. And I just felt like I was nodding my head the whole time talking about it, because I completely agree with how your organization sells menstruation, how you talk about it. You do cover every aspect of it, which, like we spoke about earlier on, it's so important that you do cover all of these different aspects, because you can't just talk about the education and then leave everything else, because they are so interlinked. It's intersectional, isn't it? So I do I massively kind of advocate for the work you do, and would love to learn more and get more involved in any way possible, really.
That's great to hear, and great to make this connection. So the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation also, we claim that every day is Dignified Menstruation Day, but we also have created like an additional day for dignified menstruation on the 8th of December, which was celebrated for the 3rd time last year. And yes, maybe that could be a possibility for you to get involved. Maybe do you have any idea how you could participate or contribute, or if you want to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to contribute in any way possible. I think whatever your organization was planning, but I think if it was you host a webinar or seminar or something like that, you get people together and from different organizations to learn. This is the work we've done in the last year, etc. Speaking to young girls as well, or people who menstruate. I think that's something I'd love to start doing, is actually hearing a little bit more from people who are menstruating in all of these different countries that we're working in. Because again, I'm speaking to usually the CEO of the organization. Well, at the end of the day, they're in a position where they know a lot more about it. They're older now and they've gone through it a lot more. Maybe they're even hit their menopause. They're not doing it anymore. So I'd love to hear from like the people who experiences themselves. But yeah, I any kind of way really you plan to, it would be great. We're doing a lot of work with different organizations and pushing for trying to get 10 million voices to talk about and volunteer with menstrual health and stuff. So there's lots of different kind of avenues, but yeah, any way you're really planning to do, we'd love to get involved.
That's great. Yeah, we'd also love to collaborate further, and maybe to have you as a member of the coalition.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So I've learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you talking to us and talking to those watching the webinar. And so I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for speaking today. And yes, I'm looking forward to future collaboration.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for putting the time together of setting it up. And I love the questions. They really kind of covered such a broad area of my work, but also menstruation in general. So I've really enjoyed today. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.